Welcome to Canada Bangladesh Social Justice Action Research Alliance. We organize critical and courageous conversations about local and global issues connected to social justice equity. Today, we are going to discuss something incredibly important. Right now in Iran, one of the most important feminist movement is progressing. Unfortunately, in many places around the world, our understanding of the feminist movement in Iran is not adequately critical. I am immensely excited and also privileged to be in presence of someone who has a very practical understanding and experiential understanding of what is happening in Iran, Nasim Basiri. So how we have organized a discussion today is that in the beginning, Nasim will give us a small presentation, and then we have gathered some questions from our Bangladeshi audience and audiences around the world, and we will go into discussion. So without further ado, Nasim, thank you very much for making some time for us.
Thank you so much, Firuze. It's so good to be with you today.
Thank
And
you.
I'm so excited to share my experiences because as Iranian feminists, we are very marginalized and isolated. So it's always good to have global audience.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And particularly, I think Bangladesh being a Muslim majority country, our perception of Iran is hugely influenced by the Iranian propaganda and also how Iran shapes the global narrative about their socioeconomic reality. So it is very critical for us to understand that what is the actual reality, critically looking into it. So Nasim, let me bring the presentation, and then as you tell me, I'll see the slide. But first, people who are not familiar with you, who are not familiar with your work and your experience, could you introduce yourself and your work to our audience so that they get some context?
Sure, definitely. I am a PhD student in women, gender, and sexuality studies at Oregon State University, where I am right now. Uh, and I moved to the United States in 2017 to do my second PhD. And I got lucky to be in a feminist department, a program here at Oregon State with lots of like very uh, compassionate professors, such as my professor is a professor of feminist studies, but also uh, she's a theologian, and I would like to talk a little bit later on when we get into the theology
Mhm.
of my presentation about the work that she just published a few years ago, and I think that would be very beneficial for the entire Muslim world to bring that intersectional theology into their Islamic theology or Islamic feminist theology. I am also a co-founder of a commission on transnational feminism or global feminism. We still have arguments about the name of the commission at the International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences. And I'm a poet, I'm an activist from underground Iran.
Thank you, Nasim. I'm sure that we'll have a fascinating conversation. So let me bring the presentation, and as you tell me, I'll change the slide.
Thank you. So, well, actually, it's not a very serious presentation. I just wanted to give an introduction to what I want to do today here with you. And uh, I'm not here to talk about witchcraft or what does witchcraft mean, because witchcraft differs in every part of the world and it's practiced differently everywhere. In the Muslim countries and societies, also it's practiced differently. But what I'm going to talk about on the issue of feminism and current feminist movements in Iran and witchcraft is something very similar to what medieval and early modern Europe experienced: the witch hunting, the execution of witches. You see the picture here in the first slide, the hanging of witches in Newcastle in 1650. Many women were accused of witchcraft, and they got persecuted and finally executed. So, can you go to the next slide, please? And here I just wanted to show you the Chashm Nazar, which is in Persian, Chashm Nazar, or Nazar in other Muslim countries is a piece of a stone or a plastic that is used to protect the people or a place or a child from the evil eye, and it's a very serious thing there. People really believe in that. I think even here in the United States or North America, also you can find them easily in every jewelry store. And this is the tree of Nazar in Cappadocia, Turkey. And let's go to the next slide, please. Here I just wanted to introduce some of the so-called Iranian witches who just got kind of killed by the Islamic government in Iran. Mahsa Amini, Nika Shakarami, and Sarina Ismailzadeh were just very young, and two of them teenagers who just wanted to be themselves and broadcasted or showed their pictures without hijab and resisted the gender apartheid, Islamic gender apartheid in Iran, but they got killed in response. They are called witches by members of the intelligence service and the Basij militia because of the way they appear, their physical appearance in the street, or their makeup, or protesting compulsory hijab. So, Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police in Iran. She was a Kurdish woman belonging to the Kurdish minority who are some of the most persecuted ethnic minorities in Iran. And next slide, please. I'm very sure that the whole world knows about Mahsa Amini by now, because everybody's protesting after her death, both in Iran and globally. Witchcraft is very, very common practice in Iran, and in not just in Iran, but in all Middle Eastern countries, especially in very marginalized and isolated towns and provinces in Iran, such as Sistan, Baluchistan, Bushehr, Hormozgan, and even Kurdistan of Iran. It's been practiced widely and against the dissent by the members of the intelligence service and Basij militia, or the Revolutionary Guards. It's a part of the Iran's politics for isolating and for persecution of the dissent since the establishment of the Islamic State after the 1979 revolution. So I tried to bring this life timeline here just to show that a woman, but also men, also members of the LGBTQ community, can be accused of being a witch just for their physical appearance, for the ways of their thinking, or for their gender identity and sexual orientation since they are a kid, or for simply being blonde, which is a very common thing also in Africa, not just in the Middle East or in Iran. But after the revolution, the 1979 revolution, it got intensified in superstitious towns and villages in Iran. I know you're from Bangladesh, and perhaps you also deal with the same thing. But in Iran, it's very serious. It's like it takes lives. It was used as a tool, as a weapon of silencing and mentally collapsing the dissent, and which led to their execution and to their annihilation as well. So here I tried to show that a target of the witchcraft can be persecuted since childhood until they are in an old age. Can you please go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So who are the witches? Witches are people like me, an activist or a poet, which is believed to possess supernatural abilities, which is a lie. It's not correct. I mean, as humans, we all have abilities. We have our own exceptional abilities and mental abilities and disabilities, but that doesn't mean that we are not humans, or we are evil, or we got supernatural power. Or in the Islamic culture, some of us are being called jinn. Jinn is the and very sure you know about it. Jinn is the visible, and in some cultures invisible, humans with supernatural power that can manipulate the reality, or like uh, practically traditional healers, poets, writers, scientists. They've been historically called witches by the religious extremists in Iran. And if you just go back to the history of mass executions in Iran after the 1979 revolution, we can just point out to the mass killings of 1988 in Iran, where thousands of women and men, they got persecuted, imprisoned, and finally got killed through political executions in Iran. They were the witches of Iran, and the majority of them, they even did not know they are evil or they are witches. I mean, with all the respect that I have for the people who call themselves witches in the West, but so many of us, we don't like to be called witches, because then it can be used against us as a way of making us socially and politically marginalized in Iran, and also in danger, especially if you come from small towns or from tribal backgrounds. There are these superstitions that targets you since childhood. And I did some anthropological research on the characteristics and the mental abilities of the people who were executed in marginalized provinces in Iran, and I find out that these people were all geniuses. Those who got persecuted, who got killed, their bodies were then missed, or they were thrown. Their dead bodies, after being executed, was thrown into graves in the middle of the deserts, which still remain without names. They were mostly coming from the families who were traditionally healers in their communities before the revolution, and they were the organizers, they were the activists, they were the poets, writers, or scientists healing people, or helping people survive psychologically. And they were the ones who helped even the clergies to win the revolution, but then later on they were betrayed by some of the fundamentalists who gained power. So these people who were called later on evil or witches, they were actually some of the most intelligent people in their tribes, very active and in the service of humanity. But unfortunately, they got killed, and some to this day, some of them just remain unknown, both their graves, and even if they stayed alive, nobody knows about them. Not even their family members. They couldn't call. They couldn't, especially in those days. We didn't have so much technological advancements in Iran. It was even difficult to make telephone conversations in the aftermath of the 1979 revolution. So it was a very big tragedy that happened, but it didn't stop. It continues to the present day. We saw Mahsa, we saw Sarina, and other kids who got killed in the street just in the recent days, or hundreds of protesters, almost 200 protesters got killed in the street, and they are called spies of the West, or the troublemakers, or evil people who got supernatural power. They're messing with Iran's national security, and so on. Can we go to the next? Oh, sorry, let's stay here. And Afro-Iranians are historically known as witches too in the traditional cultures of Iran. I come from the south of Iran, where we had this, in Bushehr province, where we have this population of Afro-Iranians who were brought by the Portuguese to the south of Iran. Then they were located in Hormozgan, in Bushehr, in Sistan and Baluchistan, and they were like culturally different. Their lifestyle, their rituals, even their religious beliefs, everything was different. So that's why they were demonized in a traditional culture that believes in hegemony only. Even people who could write pieces of poetry, or they write like critical pieces for newspapers, they are all called evil if they do not write in the favor of the Islamic Republic. And this continues to the present day. None of them are safe in their towns or in their cities, and they're not just the activists themselves, the poets, but the entire family, the entire community, and the entire tribe, if they come from tribal backgrounds. They still continue to suffer. They deal with complex mental health issues, identity crisis, because they cannot be themselves. It's like they are being put in a complex mental health condition through witchcraft, through these systematic persecutions, even if they stand up for their physical appearance, even if they stand up for their basic and fundamental rights as humans. So you can easily become target of witchcraft in those towns and cities. And right now, I just want to like everybody, the audience, and you consider this presentation as a warning, because when it's time of the uprising, and if there's a revolutionary feeling and sentiment among the nation, then the fundamentalists rise against it and go for revolutionary cleaning. What does revolutionary cleaning mean for the Islamic Republic? It means the erasure, persecution, and killing of the so-called witches or evil. Who are they? They're journalists, they are poets, they are writers, they are scientists, doctors, who give services to humanity and to the society as a whole. But the demonization and dehumanization of these people is an everlasting reality in post-revolutionary Iran. These innocent Afro-Iranian children typically get raped, sometimes on a daily basis. Women, Afro-Iranian women, are forced into prostitution, addiction. I personally witnessed the gang rape of several Afro-Iranian neighbors when I was in Iran, when I used to live in Iran before I leave Iran. And one of my neighbors, who was my close friend, she got raped. She got gang raped. She was only perhaps 18 or 19 years old, Mariam Javidan. And she, in the middle of the desert, and her eyes were were extracted from her body by the rapists, because there they believe that the religious extremists who are in the position of power, and they are the ones who rule in those geographical places. They believe that if you rape a evil, if you rape a witch, you gain all their power. And that belief has turned those places into a graveyard for anybody who is different, no matter who you are, no matter what is your gender, what is your sexuality, what is your race. Everybody can fall into this victimization, especially if your color is different or if you come from a socio-economically marginalized background. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here are two more witches, accused witches. Katayan Riahi, she's an Iranian actress, and Gugush, Iranian singer. Katayan Riahi just opposed the Islamic regime for their violations of human rights and oppression of women. And nobody knows where she is now. Just people know that she's been threatened. Her house is under attack just because of saying a word against the government. Gugush is a prominent Iranian singer who lives in exile now, but she couldn't leave the country perhaps for 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then she had to go through a lot to leave the country and continue her artistic activities in North America. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. Here we see Mehrangiz Kar, the Iranian human rights activist and writer, Simin Behbahani, the poet, Shirin Ebadi, human rights activist, who later on won the Nobel Peace Prize. But it's a Behbahani who lived in Iran until she died. The rest of the people you see in the picture, Mehrangiz Kar and Shirin Ebadi, they still live in exile. They are still dehumanized, demonized as evil, as troublemakers, as the spies of the West. This is how people with positive aims for humanities are being treated in Iran. And they're being demonized to an extent that even if they live in the United States or Britain, they don't have security, to be honest. It's like they have to be careful with their everyday interactions, everyday activities, not to fall into the trap of witchcraft. And as a result, all of these women who stood up for the rights of human in Iran, they went through very difficult lives, and their family, their husbands, their children also went through a very difficult time with them, and they were forced into exile. Next slide, please. Here are a few more witches. Ahmad Shamlou, the Iranian poet, Furugh Farrokhzad, the poet, Muhammad Mukhtari, poet, Baktash Abtin, who just got killed, was a poet, Munir Ravanipur, a writer. So these writers and poets, Furugh Farrokhzad died before the Islamic Revolution, but her legacy was attacked by the Islamic Republic after the revolution. And also, if we just look at the destiny of Furugh Farrokhzad's family, brother and sister, it was horrifying. And then I leave it to the researchers of the world to go look them up and see what happened to the family of this poet. Ahmad Shamlou who was also a survivor, former political prisoner of conscience. Nobody knows what happened to his family. They experienced imprisonment, persecution, and mental health collapse, even after the death of Ahmad Shamlu. So these are all interconnected experiences of the poets, writers, activists, and their families who should go through a very dangerous path because of their sister or father or brother's activism. Muhammad Mokhtari was another victim of political violence. He got killed in the like chain of murders, what we call it in Persian, قتل‌های زنجیره‌ای. It means the chained murders of Iran. It's a very famous series of killings of poets and intellectuals in Iran. Monir Rawanipur lives in exile right now. Her brother was executed. Her whole life was turned into a disaster. Even in the cyber spaces, I remember just at the time of every election, the agents of the Islamic Republic even go after her in the cyber spaces. Baktash Aptin, who was another radical poet and film director, he also died in custody this year, and that also gave rise to the grievance of the intellectuals and poets and writers in Iran. Let's go to the next slide, please. So it's not only women without hijab or poets and writers who are being victimized in post-revolutionary Iran, but also the Iranian women's rights activists, queer activists, sociologists, anybody who thinks differently, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, are being victimized. Rafsanjani and Parvaneh Salashuri are great examples of Muslim women who prefer to wear hijab, but they're also being persecuted for their political opinions and their activism against the theocratic regime that continues to victimize every person, every single person in the society, even their own children. Just an anthropological study of children of the enforcers of compulsory hijab or executioners or those who go after the Iranian youth for performing arts or writing poems that is against the government, they are not also safe. So I personally know a lot of them who live in exile. They had to leave because even their children were not safe in the hands of their own parents. So many of them went to jail later on. Even clergies. I visited many clergies in exile in the past decade. In South Asia, even I knew a lot of clergies who were fired from the universities. They were fired from their workspaces. And because they were not reached, they had to leave again in danger in South Asia. For example, in a place like India or Bangladesh, Islamic Republic has lots of influence. The embassies control the universities, they control the events, the activists. So it's very dangerous to live as an Iranian activist or a dissident in South Asia. It's a very important thing that I think South Asian politicians need to pay more attention to it as things are changing in Iran. So let's go to the next slide. 3 more evils or witches, Lili Galedaran, Atife Charmahalian, Mona Borzui, they are all poets who went against the government through their poetry, who criticized the human rights violation and the death of Mahsa Amini, both in the educational spaces and in the literary communities. As you know, that Iran is when it comes to literature and arts, a very important country with its own literary and artistic traditions that is very old and ancient. Poets like Hafiz, Saadi, Rumi, or Ferdowsi, that I think everybody is in love with them in South Asia. Uh, they they were actually the ones who were being also treated like these poets.
Mm.
You look at the history of the persecution of the witches in ancient Persia, and later on in the medieval times, and then now in contemporary time, we see that Atif Charmahalian, Mona Borzui, Leili Galedaran, they are all being treated. It's the same, like the witches of the medieval Islam. And it's very interesting. And in this culture, even in the Arab cultures, poets, writers, scientists, they were well respected, even sometimes worshipped before
Mhm. Mhm.
before Islam. But of course, there are rumors, there are superstitious beliefs against them also. They're being treated as jinn or being inspired by jinn, the supernatural being that many Muslims believe in them. So Mona, nobody knows anything about Mona anymore. Atif Charmahalian has the same condition. Lily Galadaran wrote her resignation from the University of Shiraz because, again, she became a victim of witchcraft at the university. So witchcraft is finding its path not just in the streets or in the prisons or in the communities, but also to the universities. Not only in Iran, but also in the West. We cannot think that these people, these activists who survive the religious apartheid and global apartheid and reach to the West, they are safe. They're not. Because after the revolution, with the Islamic Republic's propagandas, poets, writers, and even intellectuals and researchers, they were confronted with circumstances in the West that is like not realistic. Really, it's not realistic. We also experience isolation, marginalization here in the West, not just by the Islamic Republic, because Islamic Republic demonized everyone, even the freedom fighters, the people who come from tribal backgrounds with lots of, like, a vast knowledge of the world. They later on became very important activists, but they got demonized even when they went to the West, when they escaped the execution and persecution and went to the West. Even though now they are like some of the most important scientists in the world, even though they come from very low economic and social backgrounds, but they became some of the most important scientists in the world, not just in humanities and social sciences, but also in engineering and medical sciences. So that's another important to know. How come these evils could become the change makers and changing the world through their sciences? Let's go to the next slide. So here is these are two pictures of women being arrested by the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, or morality police, which often come from very low socioeconomic backgrounds, and in fact they are the ones that are oppressed, but have turned into another oppressor, arresting women who look different. They have different hairstyles, or different looks, different makeup, dark makeup, or if you just look at the pictures here, you see that they are totally different, and it's not pleasant for the morality police to see such women, because again, they think that they have some kind of supernatural power that can damage the purity of the society. So they have to be warned and persecuted, and more importantly, disciplined to fit into that Islamic society and its norms. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I try to bring this figure here, Muhammad Reza Mir Tajuddini, who is the chairman of Assembly of Representative of the Northwest in the Islamic Council, to show the seriousness of what I'm talking about right now. I mean, the mass executions and the revolutionary cleaning happened right after the revolution. It's not a joke. Iran is being called out for such treatments, of such violent treatment of the dissent. And now that the revolutionary sentiment is rejuvenated among the Iranian nation, they're starting to give new fatwas that might work, because such fatwas lead into the creation of discourses that can have horrendous consequences, again, for the Iranian intellectuals and feminist activists. Especially just a few days ago, he was comparing the protesters, the street protesters, to ISIS, which is a well-known terrorist organization. He said that troublemakers like ISIS use every opportunity to betray and attack the nation and the country. And if we give if we give them a chance and a field, they will act with such an approach in all spheres. Some figures in the country who have eaten the bread of this country in safety for 40 years and have become artists, celebrities, sportsmen, are also betraying these people and the country. And after this period has passed and the public atmosphere of the society has been stabilized, they will raise this issue through the parliament, institutions such as radio and television with follow up, so that a revolutionary cleansing is done in the country once again. So even he confirms what I'm arguing here, that they have this force and aims to do the revolutionary cleaning once again. So I'm ready to answer questions right now. Just wanted to bring into your attention that what I am talking about is not a joke, and it's Iran should not be treated or considered as a stage of theater where the world is watching them right now. There must be a serious response to such horrendous violations of human rights and obvious threats against humanity.
Thank you, Nasim. This was such informative presentation, and I mean, right now, as you and I are speaking, it's in Bangladesh 4 a.m. in the 3 a.m. in the morning, which is why I'm sure that this will definitely, because we are a Muslim majority country, and at least and you brought something incredibly important, which us from South Asia need to recognize it immensely important, that how Iranian authorities and government and propaganda, how does it work through academia in South Asia? And I think a lot of the times we blend our love for literature. We think that our love for literature, like Rumi or Ferdowsi, we somewhat equate it with the repressive regime, what they're doing right now. So the representation of Khomeini, representation of the Islamic revolutionary figures are exalted to a stage that they cannot be questioned in any shape or form. So, not that we all have the privilege or the liberty or the safety to be able to ask critical questions. So, when we have the opportunity, I think we ought to ask the serious questions. So, you touched on something very important. Could you please explain a bit more on how Iranian government is using the academic infrastructure of the global south, let's say academia, let's say establishing departments, financing it, giving money in order to promote the state sponsored narrative, and why we from the global south should be warned about it?
Yeah, I think we Iranians, we always blame the West for what happened in Iran and after the revolution and even prior to the revolution, which is a very legitimate criticism, I think, because the West definitely played an important role in a major political transformation, not just in Iran, but across the world and especially in the global South. So this is a reality that I don't want to ignore. But also, global South played an important role, maybe consciously or unconsciously, in maintaining the fundamentalist power in Iran. Through how? I say that because I lived in South Asia for years, and I followed both the political opinion, cultural opinion, and literary opinion on Iran, and especially because I'm an activist and I was a literary activist as well. So I was in the middle of these discourses all the time. I know the love that Indian subcontinent and South Asia in general has for Iran is enormous, but also the respect to the Iran as a spiritual country, as a country with a long history of spirituality and different religions, ancient religions, and then later on Islam, and also Sufism, which is very much intertwined and mingled with its literature. So in Iran, literature is almost like a religion for
That's right.
people. It's not. It's not only literature. It's like it it creates people's future. It shapes
Mhm.
people's future and their understanding of the world. So I know that South Asians, they love Iranians, especially because of the historical exchanges that we had for centuries and millenniums, also artistic and cultural exchanges. But what I also noticed was that they also pay so much respect to the current regime because they are Iranians, which I think to some extent is okay because they're doing that for the nation. But then I think they need to understand that supporting an authoritarian, a theocratic regime could have harsh consequences for the Iranian nation as a whole, because South Asia is a very powerful geographical spot, and it really influences politics of the world towards the Middle East, not just directly influencing Iran's politics. But then also another thing that I noticed that was that the Indian universities, not all, but the majority, are being so much influenced by the Islamic Council and the embassies of Iran in South Asia, including in Bangladesh. Even if you want to register as a student or enroll at the university, you need to get a permission from the embassy of Iran. So you can be eligible to apply for a university degree. to this extent. And many activists in South Asia are being persecuted, Iranian activists who live there in exile, or they choose to go to study there because it's like we have so much in common and it's economically affordable for them. So this is another thing, but I think the law for literature should not let anybody to empathize with the government that kills people. And then hopefully they can get to see the other side of Iran, because the violence and killings and all these oppressions are not and cannot represent Iran's culture and social reality.
Right. Exactly. And particularly me growing up in Bangladesh, and obviously growing up Ghazali. I grew up reading Rumi. So I think it took me a long time, particularly having a lot of Iranian friends here in Canada who speak from lived experiences, not from the theocratic representation of a nation globally. And you have touched on something incredibly important, that even at the time of these great spiritual figures, they themselves were persecuted. We often forget that Ibn Sina was persecuted by pretty much a
Yes.
lot of authorities. So yeah.
I personally
Um,
know a clergy who was
mhm,
persecuted in Iran and fired
mhm,
from the university and chose to live in India. And then he was
mhm,
persecuted again by the agents of the Islamic Republic, who are
mhm,
like freely
mhm,
persecuting people in South
mhm,
Iranian activists in
mhm,
South Asia, which is a very tragic thing, because
mhm,
not every activist from Iran, especially from underground Iran, can escape to Europe. Uh,
mhm.
I personally had lots of problems just to attend conferences in Europe or other countries in the world, in the West, including North America and Australia.
Yeah.
So it's a great opportunity for them, but
Mhm.
also it can be a disastrous experience.
Right. Professor Farhana has a very important comment for us. In Bangladesh, a young woman was harassed for wearing a so-called inappropriate dress recently. Although we are not a theocratic state, mob trial and punishment are taking place in the name of religion. I guess as Bangladeshi women, we should be aware of the extremism that is raising nowadays. Thank you for the informative presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comment. Yeah, I think it's very important. I think what Iran needs right now, Iranian women and LGBTQ people, especially I say LGBTQ people because they've been removed from the entire scholarship, media reports, and it's very important when we talk about Iranian women, we talk about LGBTQ plus people because they are also the most marginalized in Iran. So it's very important as scholars and intellectuals when we establish debates or new discourses, we bring them into the discourses as well, because they've been historically marginalized and also removed from the scholarship in academia, and both in academia and media. So what is important is that we need those kind of solidarities, because the problem of violence against women or women's oppression is a global phenomenon. It's not only something that is associated with Iran. Yeah, it's horrifying. It is devastating in Iran, but
Mhm.
also in other Muslim countries, also in Christian countries, everywhere across the world. Maybe the level or the intensity is different, but it's a global phenomenon. And the other day, I was talking to one of my colleagues about it, because one of my research interests is on domestic violence. So I look at I have an interdisciplinary perspective on domestic violence in Iran, and it was a subject of my first PhD dissertation. So when I look at the literature produced on domestic violence, like very limited all over the Muslim world, not just in Iran. In Iran, there's only one book published on domestic violence in
Mm.
English. Imagine in a
Wow.
country that violence is so widespread, the prevalence of violence so widespread, only one book is being published in the entire life of the Islamic Republic in post-revolutionary Iran. And what does it mean? That means persecution, that means penalty and punishment for academic research on the violations of human rights, not just in the domestic sphere, but also in public political violence, because political violence in Iran is horrendous. When you are arrested as an activist or as a poet, you can never predict what's going to happen to you in the prison. Some
Right. Exactly.
prisoners have they do not have harsh experiences, and they come to the West and talk about it, and they overgeneralize the political prisoners, Iranian political prisoners of conscious violent experiences in the Iranian prisons. So it's
Right.
like only one-sided, narrow-minded narrations. These all need to be avoided, and we all, I mean, the entire world should come into a conclusion that yes, Iran was out from everything. Iranian feminists were out from transnational feminist movements in the world. Like what the world, what the United States, American feminists, Western feminists did for the causes, transnational causes like Palestine, for example, that did not happen for Iranian women's movements. Even though they are very progressive, they influence the entire feminist movements in the MENA region, North America, and Middle East. And their feminisms led to lots of uprisings in North Africa, for example, after the Bahar Arabi, the Arab Spring. But then, where are Iranian feminists in literature? Why they're not being invited to talk in media? Yes, it's like there was this, Eurocentrism and anti-colonial discourses, but that should not be so intensified that send an entire nation into coma just by silencing the voice of women and LGBTQ people in the West. None of the feminists from the terrible had our experience. It's been very traumatic, and the COVID, the advancements of the internet and technologies helped Iranian feminists and LGBTQ people, activists to raise their voice
Right.
through social media, through the psychological transformations that COVID brought with itself, that it
Right.
changed the power dynamics. That's why the Islamic Republic is going for another revolutionary cleaning, because the
Right.
power dynamic has changed. So how can we help Iran and Iranian feminists to not to go down, both mentally and also economically and socially, because we are all broke right now.
Right.
We,
Right.
yeah, we are all broke psychologically. Then economically, we lost
Mhm.
whatever we had for our
Mhm.
fights.
Right, exactly. Um, sh- um, our sister from Bangladesh has written that yes, now it is a global issue, but in some places it is also a burning issue. Thanks, both of you, to talk about this issue. We have a very good question from Noura. That do you have any comments on the persecution against the Baha'i community in Iran?
Yeah, persecution of Baha'is in Iran is a historical thing. It doesn't,
Mm.
it's not just related to the post-revolutionary era, but in post-revolutionary era, the government aimed to destroy the entire religious minority, again because of being different. They were called witches. They were called evil because of their religious beliefs and their belief in humanity, their belief in universal peace, which is against the extremist, religious extremist principles and ideologies in Iran. But in post-revolutionary Iran, their houses were burned, I know in the south of Iran, many of these Baha'is were living together in one area, and the entire area, residential area, was demolished and turned into religious spaces, or like Friday prayers, mosques. So they did such horrifying human rights violation. They were killed. Women were raped. They were imprisoned. Many of them were forced into exile, even in the United States. And wherever you go, even in the South Asia, in Bangladesh, in India, you got the big population of Baha'is. You got the Lotus Temple in New Delhi. Uh, and just recently, with all these uprisings and the chaotic situation in Iran, the government again went after the Baha'i minorities, because they are the most vulnerable in Iran. So whenever they feel danger, they go to the most vulnerable people. Who are those? Or they are Baha'is, they are writers, poets, journalists, uh, university professors, doctors, anyone who has objection towards them, they go after. But Baha'is are the most persecuted in Iran, and they are very peaceful people. So whatever the government did to them, they're forced to stay silent, because can have very harsh consequences. Just recently, the hundreds of riot police attacked a village in the north of Iran called Roshanku and demolished Baha'is' houses in Roshanku, which was followed by lots of objections and protests in Iran.
I think because you and I both are in academia, we can probably also take a critical look at our own complicity in understanding the internal conflict. I mean, I think, and when I say this, I do not undermine the cruelty that European colonialism has caused in the world. There is no shape or form I'm undermining it, and I'm very aware of it. But I think our inability to look at our own history, particularly the spread of Islam in the way that what it did to Northern Africa, it was not a peaceful process. And I think we're stuck at a time. I mean, there's a fantastic book by Professor Deepa Kumar from Radko University, that Islamophobia and the politics of empire. We do understand that in global politics, in global political economy, Muslims are the new enemy in order to maintain the global political dialectical relationship, in order to produce the profit that it needs to produce. But at the same time, if we do not take an honest look with personal integrity, we cannot transcend the trap that we have brought us into, is that how ideology is actually doing that, right? So, I
Yes.
mean, this is something very important.
I
Um,
think COVID, sorry, I just give a quick answer. So I think COVID
go on,
made us all aware that it's
mhm,
time to be honest with ourselves.
mhm,
No
mhm,
matter who we are, Muslims or Jews,
mhm,
we it really showed us that we were suffering in pre-COVID era, to an
mhm,
extent that we all went crazy. So it's not
mhm,
a time to be biased, especially as academics and researchers. It's a
mhm,
time to think scientifically about
mhm,
everything, and to give complex responses to such a complex situation that the world is in and is suffering from it, like the war in Ukraine, or the situation of violation of human rights in Iran. And we need to pay more attention to the experiences of people in the hands of dictators and in the hands of authoritarian regimes, because in addition to their historical sufferings, COVID has also brought disasters with itself to the entire. So we need to think about global peace. We cannot think about peace as an individual thing anymore. Yeah, we
mhm,
need to change ourselves, We need to change our entire communities and nation and the world. So we need to look at the world as a very complex system and how to rescue the system.
Right,
So
right.
it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim, a scholar or not. Yeah, but also Muslim empires did horrendous violations of human rights. With the case of Iran is an obvious thing, but also what happened to Iran 1,500 years ago. The Arab invasion of Iran was kind of the similar situation, like 1979 revolution. It was an attack on Iranian culture, and I'm not trying to raise the anti-Arab or anti-Islamic
Exactly.
sentiment, but this is the reality. It is the
Mhm,
reality that they burn lots of books, kind of
mhm,
the
mhm.
same thing that Iranians
Yeah.
fell into later on, even though they were criticizing Arabs before like before and after the invasion of Iran. But
Yeah.
the kind of the same situation, and even it had linguistics consequences for Iran because people were forced to speak Arabic. But then, because of the power of literature in Iran, they could rescue the language and culture again. Shahnameh of Ferdowsi, the Persian epic, is a great example of the Persian literature power to transform culture or even to uh, destabilize the dictatorial regimes,
Mhm,
aiming to destroy the culture, history, and even languages. So
mhm, mhm,
when we want to look at the Iran's problem, we need to look at it from a really interdisciplinary perspective, because
mhm.
it's not a one-sided thing. It's not a one-sided. It's a multi-layered problem. It's a disaster, a mental health collapse. So many
Mhm.
things in one.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. You and I, we are both born in a society that are predominantly Muslim society, and that puts us into a rather tricky place. That it's about taking responsibility. I mean, obviously, we cannot forget Abu Lughod's understanding is that obviously the global north. I mean, the white man is very curious or interested to salvage the brown women from the oppression of brown men,
Yeah.
therefore justifying their intervention, whether it is political or military. So at the same time, we cannot deny the violence, what you just have said. I mean, what's that famous movie by Noreshta? Yeah, I mean, the stoning of Suraya.
Yeah, it's a stoning
Uh,
of Uriah.
yeah.
The reality, maybe it's not practiced anymore in
Mhm, mhm,
Iran, but it is a very tragic reality of Iranian women who
mhm,
disobeyed the social norms and
mhm,
religious ideologies in Iran.
mhm,
It was happening, and I don't know if it still happens
mhm,
in isolated traditional cultures in Iran. But what I'm trying to say that some of the areas in Iran, the harsh experiences that Iranian women had was not less than the marginalized traditional places in Afghanistan or Saudi
mhm,
Arabia. So
mhm,
yes, Iran is a very progressive country, but not every Iranian experiences the same thing. You know what I mean?
mhm,
As
mhm,
humans, we all have or exceptional experiences. For example, I come from a tribal background in the south of Iran, and women in that place, they are very different. We are trained from the like childhood. We know martial arts, we know different languages, we have our own tribal culture. Even though I have my international culture, when I go back home, I become a totally different human, a totally different person. And I know you come from kind of the same background. So maybe it's weird, scary for even some Iranians, but this is a reality. Multicultural people exist in Iran, but they've been marginalized for
mhm,
many, many decades, not just because of Islamic Republic, but also because of this hegemonic
mhm,
mainstream culture of Iran that really crushes different people. And
Right.
then in addition to their like religious superstitious beliefs,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
jinn, or if you can change, if you're multicultural, that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you have supernatural powers, just humans capacity to learn everything that they like, right? And
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
have some mental disabilities, like or I don't know if I should call it disabilities or not, but the ADHD,
Mhm.
epilepsy, especially artists and poets. So it's
Mhm.
really horrible to demonize people because of their mental disabilities, or because of their language abilities, or
Mhm.
art that is different. You know, everybody has different talents, so it
Mhm.
must be respected uh,
Mhm.
everywhere in the world, because we really suffered. People like
Mhm.
us really suffered in those communities,
Mhm.
especially
Yeah.
if you come from tribal background. Even though
Yeah.
women in my tribe, we are very powerful women. My mom is the head of the tribe of 10,000 people. So maybe she's not a Western feminist, and she doesn't know anything about Western feminism, but she was a fighter. She's giving services to an entire tribe, including men. And it's very important to know that those tribes are really patriarchal and traditional. So this
Mhm.
kind of women also exist. It's not like Iranian women are oppressed. Yes, they are oppressed, but they are also they're not defenseless. They are defending
Yeah. Yeah.
themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Nawal Al Sadawi who was in a BBC interview. She was telling the person who was interviewing is that feminism is not a Western concept. So
That's very
I
true.
mean, yeah, bless her
Yeah,
soul.
we
I
have
mean,
our own feminisms in the south of Iran, for example,
Mhm.
or in the south of Iran, we have our own feminism. With I don't know anything about the mainstream feminism
Mhm.
in Iran, because also when you come from a linguistically, culturally different background, you are automatically out of the any kind of mainstream discourses. Again, because of the dictatorship, but not also because of dictatorship, only because of dictatorship, but also because of literary,
Mhm.
academic culture
Mhm.
that is in the hands of mafia.
Mhm.
You know, so
Mhm.
if you're out, if you bring different narratives or theories,
Mhm.
then you are a threat to that
Right. Right. Right.
to
Yeah.
that system
Yeah. Yeah.
that perpetuates systems of oppression, and its
Mhm.
academia is a part of it.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
happens in the West. It's not
Mhm.
only in Iran, but also in the entire world.
Right. A friend of us asked a question that as a feminist, you often have to express your resistance towards the patriarchal culture of your birthplace, wherever you were born, while also claiming various aspects of the same culture as your own. I'm a Bangladeshi. So if I'm born in places like Bangladesh, I know this structure is patriarchal, but
Yeah.
in places like that, how difficult has this been for you personally and also for other women who have been resisting with you?
Hmm.
So the question was asked by Dr. Shungita Rai from India for Nasim Basiri.
Thank you so much. It's a very important question. I think, again, because I come from a very different Iranian background, but for many Iranians, even here
Mhm.
in the United States, I don't look like an Iranian, again, because I'm culturally different, because I lived in different countries in the world. So, of course, our identity and lifestyle, everything is being shaped by the cultures, especially as a ethnographer, anthropologist, sociologist. If you live in those cultures, so you do totally transform whether you want it or not. I think you are also not like a typical Bangladeshi from your town or village, right?
I
So
will agree with that.
yeah, that's what I enjoy. That's why I enjoy talking to you, because I know you come from kind of similar background, so we understand
Mm,
each other. We can navigate the conversation. Uh, yes, for me it was very difficult, because I was a feminist since I was a kid, and I
mm,
was I grew up among poets, writers, and intellectuals, and the descent who really helped me understand who I am, first of
Mhm.
all, and then who I want to be, what I want in this life. You know, they really shaped my identity, my understanding of the world, and even who I am today. So, but despite this fact that I grew
Mhm.
up in an open-minded family and community, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that I did not experience
Mhm.
the harsh realities of women in my
Mhm.
town or in Iran. Yes,
Mhm.
I did, even in to a greater extent because of the work I was doing, and again because of poetry, because poetry is a very dangerous, considered as a dangerous thing in Iran. It's um, against religious ideologies. It has always been critical of
Mhm.
tyranny and oppression. So it's been
It's pretty
always
much universal, though. Pretty much universal.
yes,
That pretty much
yes,
all.
but yeah, but it's in a place like Iran, it's totally
Mhm.
different. I think
Right. Right. Mhm.
uh, Iranian poets
Mhm.
are among some of the most misfortuned,
Mistreated. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
intellectuals in the
Mhm.
world. Really,
Mhm.
really horrible situations they experience, horrible lives. Most of them went out of reality, and they experience amnesia to an extent that they don't remember themselves. I'm doing research on this, and to be honest, the result of my research made me very sick, because then you get into the details of what really happened to them, and it's horrible, and their life is being like under surveillance for 40 years. Even they cannot grow up, or reach a level they really deserve, both spiritually and in terms of publications, because of the restrictions and the censorships was imposed on publication. Even it existed prior to the revolution, but then rules and were progressive. There were a lot of fights going on against the Shah's regime, again for the violations of human rights. And these poets were among people who made those movements possible. But then they
Mhm.
were all betrayed after the revolution. But
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
were also called as the betrayers, those who
Mhm.
betrayed the nation.
Mhm.
Yes. So it's a very complicated story.
Yeah. What do you think, in your experience, now that you live in the United States, you have also lived in South Asia, you were pretty well traveled. So, one thing that we understand things academically, epistemologically, the other one is ontological understanding of the world. What are some of the things that you think that whether the feminist in global South or the feminist in global North, Western feminist, they I mean, I haven't lived in Iran, but I have a bit of confidence that the feminist movement in Iran is unique in its own right. It cannot be equated with the feminist movement in Bangladesh or in West. So, in your experience, what are some of the things that people get wrong, Western feminist or feminists from global South get wrong about the uniqueness of feminist movement in Iran?
Mhm. That's again another question, because I am in the field of feminism right now, and
Hmm.
had this. I've been in transnational movements,
Hmm.
feminist transnational movements across the world. Also, as you said, lived in several continents, including Europe. But after living in these places, I found out that really feminists in a global scale, in a global level, they don't know anything about not Iran, but also not about the women's movement. And again, it's not their fault, I think, because everything about Iran is a secret. It is
Hmm.
designed to fail. Like the whole system was designed to fail the Iranian feminists, and so they fail uh, around the world, and they made the Western feminists very scared of us. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I used to travel the world and speak in different conferences, academic conferences. When I used to say I'm an Iranian feminist, and I didn't know that I'm a scary person for them. They were like, "Wow, you're an Iranian feminist? Ooh, Iranian feminist,
Mhm.
independent researcher." But yeah, and what does it mean that you're scared of me? Then later on, I found out that this is a result of the Islamic Republic's propagandas and
Mm.
demonization of intellectuals and activists. They were going to the United Nations, academic spaces in the West, in North America. They were all colonized by the agents of the Islamic Republic,
Mm.
not the real intellectual, no, not those who are independent, by the
Mm.
mafia, academic mafia. And we had to hide ourselves just to survive. And I know that many of those who were active in the United States, they never dared to go to Europe and speak in conferences because of the fear of terror. But now
Mm.
things have changed, especially because of internet. So we don't need to travel a lot. We can organize things online and educate the world about their situation. This is exactly what's happened the past few years. And this COVID, even though it was a natural disaster, but it also had some um, positive sides also. So we're hoping that the movements that had already started, and it's not a joke. Nasrin Parvaz wrote a piece for Guardian, and she clearly explained that these protests, these movements, these current feminist movements are not just an angry outbursts. These are all consequences and results of generations of trauma, generations of oppression and suppression and killing. So it's better the world takes it seriously, this time,
Mhm.
because otherwise it will, Iranians will never forgive the West. We were
Mhm.
always Iranian women's soul, bodies, life was used as a tool against the Western imperialism, Western colonialism by the religious extremists. This is a very big disrespect to a woman and her body. They don't want to be used as a tool to fight, to be fought against the imperialism of the West. And
Mhm.
I remember I used to go to conferences in the West, like places like Paris, or like, for example, Copenhagen, where feminism has a real meaning there. And they were telling us that you should stop talking about violations of human rights. It's very dangerous. You can establish war. The same propaganda, the same narrations that Islamic Republic uses, it was very widespread in among the Western scholars and Western feminists. I remember once I told several Western feminists in a conference organized by the United Nations, I told them, you need to empower us, not our government. And
Mm.
they were like, no, we're not. We're not going to empower women, because they all wanted to escape from the labels of war and genocide. Islamic Republic was very, very successful in brainwashing the Western academia in their own favor, which is a very
Mhm.
sad reality. And we are sure that now the Western feminists know that. And when I say Western feminists, Western feminism, I don't mean
Mhm.
only whites or those white mainstream white feminists who wrote a letter to George Bush for military interventions in the Middle East, like Afghanistan and Iraq, or women's rights. We don't want that. Iranian women are very powerful. They are strong enough to fight for their own rights,
Mhm.
also LGBTQ people plus. But it's the West that has
Mhm.
silenced us, and
Mhm.
now we
Mhm.
have proofs for that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, so towards the end of if you want to conclude, wrap this discussion, this dialogue, and obviously this is just the beginning of dialogue, and we need to have ongoing dialogue to understand. Because I don't know, I'm sure that you have heard that famous song that, the revolution will not be televised. So obviously, if you challenge structure, if you challenge authority, you will not be entertained. You will not be given a space.
Yes.
Um, I'll read a quick comment and then I'll ask you last question. That thank you. I'm an Iranian Baha'i who is in Bangladesh, who is a Bangladeshi citizen, and your empathy towards the Baha'is in Iran, as well as your knowledge of the persecution against them, are highly appreciated. Many thanks once again. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you so much, Nora. I think, as poets and activists, since we are kids,
Hmm.
whether we want it or not, we are the observers of the human rights violations, especially if you come from a place like Iran, where we had to protect ourselves while trying to survive. We could not detach ourselves from the rest of the vulnerable people who were being persecuted, and the violence were being visited on them. So and it's very important. That's what we expect from the world, to really associate and relate us to their movements. Iranian women and LGBTQ movements should not be something separated from the rest of the transnational movements going on in the world.
Right, right. So to wrap this discussion, who would, let's say somebody from Bangladesh, or let's say somebody from Canada, and I'm sure that you know that the brutal murder of Mahsa has raised in a sparked uh, uh, protests around the world, including Canada, where I am at the moment. Um, and a lot of Canadian women, men, they have expressed their solidarity. So if somebody wants to understand the social reality of Iran away from the propaganda and the state-sponsored narrative of authority, who are some of the scholars or books or authors that you would recommend that would give us a perspective which is not very popular? Give us a critical perspective.
Well, that's a very good question, but I think there are so many authors, both in Iran and in the Iranian diaspora, that uh, can shed a light on their histories, their autobiographies,
Mm,
their diaries. I'm actually working on the history of gender violence in contemporary Iran, in post-revolutionary Iran
mm,
specifically, through
mhm,
looking at the literature and cinema. So
mhm,
right now, I don't want to disclose the
mhm,
content of my
mhm. Yeah, yeah,
dissertation, but some of the authors that I am looking into their works are Nasrin Parvaz,
yeah.
who themselves were a victim of political violence, and she spent a long time in prison. She was tortured. It's much better if you go read the book,
Mhm,
a woman's memoir in prison, and some other works by Shahrnush Parsipur might be helpful. I mean, if you read anything from Iranian literature, that could help you understand the histories and the stories of people in post-revolutionary Iran. But I can definitely send you a link, or send you an email later on where you can
yeah,
share the list of the authors who might be helpful
yeah.
in understanding even today's situation in Iran. Because in order to understand today's or the current situation, we need to look at the history. Uh,
Right, right, right.
what is better than literature?
Yeah, exactly. That would be actually, obviously, I myself, I'm a doctoral researcher, so I have my own research in my area. But a huge part of my research looks into propaganda, the holy trinity of propaganda, power, and profit. Is that how they are intertwined? You cannot separate propaganda from power, and how they're actually leveraged for capitalist purpose. I think it would be a great service if you could send us a list. We would be able to publish it in our site. That some of the bibliography or something that, okay, these are some of the, and I hope someday maybe you or somebody does a like a um, like a bibliography, like a critical bibliography. That these are the scholars. Like for example, one of the things that we do in our research team, in our areas of research, we list these are critical scholars, not just a
Okay.
scholar, but critical scholars that who are asking critical questions. We may not have the answer, but if
Yes.
you have critical question, it prods our intellect to find out answers that are probably not very popular.
That's what I always say. We don't need to have an answer, or we don't need to have solutions for
Mhm.
problems. But we can raise questions.
Yeah, yeah,
That's very
and
important. Raising questions, and I think it's a brilliant idea because Iranian intellectuals or academics in Iran and in diaspora, they they were not faced with justice. People don't
Mhm.
read their works, unfortunately, like other like academic and writers from other parts of the world. And that is also the marginalization of
Mhm.
Iranian academia and
Mhm.
especially literature, especially a country like Iran with with an ancient literary culture deserves more attention. But believe it or not, in the past few decades, we witnessed war on Iranian literature by
Wow.
the West, by the even by Middle Eastern
Mhm.
scholars and the agents of the Islamic Republic
Mhm.
in Western academia. I think it's a very good idea because I have a bibliography of my research where
Mhm.
exactly
Mhm.
I got a list of the
Mhm.
authors and the scholars that you were talking about. So that's a great
Mhm.
idea. I'll send it to you later on.
Yeah, please do. And maybe someday, maybe somebody listens to our conversation at any point in time, and probably can recognize. For example, the global north, they do an excellent. For example, in my areas, I have seen quite a few areas. They have extensive annotated bibliography. Is that who are some of the best authors, what are their key ideas, and here's an annotated bibliography. So in this way, what happens, my master's thesis was actually on epistemic violence, that
Nice.
the violence that takes place in academic spaces in the process of knowledge production, what gets silenced, right?
Yeah.
I think, I usually tell my students is that you will never end up knowing everything, but if you start by questioning things that like things that start, what you know, but
Yeah.
then if you start questioning them, then you will start realizing,
I think
oh.
it's very important to be self-critical because as
Yes.
scholars, our whole life and academic journey is just a
Mm.
learning process,
Right, right,
and we
right.
need to learn together. It's like I
Mm.
don't want to impose my views on you,
Right.
and I cannot accept your views, but
Exactly.
we can create views
Exactly.
together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Because if you accept my views, there is no discussion, there is no learning.
Yes.
Because discussion happens in humble disagreement that,
Mhm.
Nasim, this is your point of view. I see it from this vantage point. And then it enriches our perspective to understand it from multiple vantage point, promoting plurality.
That is a very important thing. I think we need to have it in Iranian academia because
Mhm.
after the revolution,
Mhm.
the mental health issue
Mhm.
in Iran really got very serious. People went
Mhm.
through real mental health collapse and breakdowns. And Iran is a country that is illiterate when it comes to the mental health issues.
Mhm.
So I think it's a
Mhm.
very good time that everybody pays attention to their mental health and the importance of taking care of their mental health, whether they are in politics or they are in
Mhm.
academia, because it really affects the entire society, especially if you're in the market of knowledge production. Uh,
Mhm.
we see that
Mhm.
the sad consequences of uh, academics who didn't take care of their mental health, or
That's right.
they failed to establish conversations with the
Mhm.
world. Now
Mhm.
we see the
Yeah.
chaos of Iran is because of that. Not just academics, but also the clergies, but also the
Right.
politician, and being always right, having these nationalist sentiments that leads to the collapse of the nation.
Exactly. Exactly.
especially in 21st century. So it's
that's
the time
that's
that
right.
Iranians should have a conversation or learn how to have conversation with the world.
Exactly. Nasim, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to have future conversations, with you, and to build the global solidarity, to understand that, we all part of the same species, walking hand in hand. If we walk towards collective peace, we can, or as the path is going, it's not really
Yeah,
uplifting.
definitely. I think it's very correct, and I think the world should start looking at Iranians not just as warriors, but
Mhm.
also as humans, and they need to
Right.
have a normal life. Maybe, I don't know, normal in their own ways.
Hmm.
We don't need Western intervention or cultural, uh,
Hmm.
revolutions that makes us like the West, because we have our
Hmm.
own beautiful
Hmm.
culture and we try to save it even in the darkest times of
Hmm.
Iran.
Hmm.
And it is there, it's still alive there. And we
Hmm.
see that. I mean,
Hmm.
even though the Iranian authorities did not let researchers enter Iran or documents what's going on, or even the culture, even our traditions, but it's over. Internet made a big hole,
Hmm.
in dictatorship. So it's
Exactly.
collapsing.
Yeah.
And it's a cultural revolution. I mean, the
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
should accept that.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Nasim. I wish you a
Thank you so
wonderful
much.
day for the rest of the day. And thank you, our audience, for asking wonderful questions. We will see you again in our next conversation. Have a great day. Bye bye.